I said several weeks ago that if the president took a position on a bill so that we knew we would actually be making a law and not just having serial votes, I'd be happy to put it on the floor. If the president is in favor of a number of things that he has discussed openly and publicly, and I know that if we pass it, it'll become law, I'll put it on the floor.
That voice, of course, is Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. He is the same guy who wouldn't even allow votes on 2 gun control bills involving background checks that have both passed the House. Now, as you heard, he's waiting for the president to commit before he does. Now, since the president has been all over the place on this issue, Mitch could be in for a long wait. In the meantime, the Washington Post published an editorial in today's paper pleading with McConnell to do something. I want to read a portion of it. Quote, "What if there was a mass shooting in the U.S. not once or twice or 4 or 6 times monthly, but every single day? A big one, the kind that electrifies social media and squats for days on page 1. Would that be enough to move Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell from his insistent inertia on gun safety? Would any volume of bloodshed convince the Kentucky Republican that Congress faces a moral imperative to act?" The Post also listed the names of people killed in mass shootings in America. The list, it goes on for several pages. Now, Congress isn't doing anything about guns, but some major private corporations are. Now, in the wake of the shooting that killed 22 people in a Walmart in El Paso, the retailer is halting its sales of ammunition for handguns and assault weapons, and it's also discouraging people from carrying in their stores. As you can imagine, the NRA, not happy about this. It released a statement on Twitter, and I'll read a portion for you. "It is shameful to see Walmart succumb to the pressure of the anti-gun elites. Lines at Walmart will soon be replaced by lines at other retailers who are more supportive of America's fundamental freedoms." Well, my next guest just penned a piece in Politico. It's called, "I Was an NRA Lobbyist. Here's my roadmap for gun reform." Richard Feldman, he joins us now. Richard, I appreciate a few minutes. Thank you.
Glad to be here.
You know, of course, it isn't just Walmart making that decision. Dick's has taken a similar stance. There's been others as well. And what I thought interesting about Walmart was it wasn't the bloodshed that just happened, but their own workers in a separate incident were the victims of gun violence. A young guy came in with full body armor and an assault weapon into their store, and there was panic, and the cops had to be called in. This wasn't the theoretical. This was the real. You know, I saw the response by the NRA, but as weakened as the NRA is right now with all the suits and all the internal dysfunction, let alone the questions about how much real economic heft they have, and even the polling that says their members want something much more than their leadership seems to want, wouldn't now be the perfect time to not be afraid on the NRA and for Congress to act?
Well, you know, there's many issues going on simultaneously here. The power that's attributed often to the NRA doesn't belong to the leadership. The power is in the fact that there are 5 million members of NRA, and there are another 25 million Americans or so who read their magazines, get their views, and in general agree with their stand. But that doesn't mean that they agree with every stand in every percept of it. For example, the whole issue with background checks. Look, I was involved in this fight 30 years ago on the Brady Law. I led the Firearm Industries Association at the time, and I testified before Charlie Schumer's committee at the time in favor of mandatory background checks before the transfer of a firearm from a dealer to a civilian. It makes sense to include transfers between strangers in commercial transactions, whether that be at gun shows, flea markets, or online sales. Where I would draw the line is when it comes to friends and relatives. That's where gun owners get upset, but the problems aren't when you sell a gun or transfer a gun to your son or daughter or parent. The problems are when you sell a gun to someone and you don't know anything about them.
And you've forgotten more about this than I know, okay? So I'm not pretending here to be an expert, but it just seems to be, and I'm sure we'll talk about this with assault weapons as well, whenever there's a carve out, whenever it's not an absolute, then you get into no man's land where what you can define as a clear friend or family, somebody else might say, oh yeah, I know the guy. And then all of a sudden you have a gray area once again. As folks probably know, the guy in Texas, he was denied a gun, except, you know, he does basically goes to a gun show or he does something else, and then all of a sudden he is once again in that no man's land area. I know what you're saying, but why do we have to have carve-outs and exceptions for this? Why don't we make it absolute? I mean, just because I hand my kid my fishing rod doesn't mean he can go fishing. He still needs a fishing license. My point is, why don't we just make it flat instead of this exception here, this exception there?
Well, that depends whether you want to see movement on this to solve most of the problem, or you want to continue this political fight that we have in this country, because we discuss it as though it was a policy issue, but in fact, this is all about politics, not about policy. And sometimes you give a little on the sides here. You say, look, let's get 99% of the problem taken care of and move on to other issues, whether it's within guns or somewhere else. The fact that Walmart isn't going to sell guns isn't going to matter to somebody determined to walk into a Walmart and shoot people. Whether they sell guns and ammo or not really has little to do with a crazy person wanting to kill as many people as possible.
You say, so Richard, if I can, let's stay on the crazy person thing, because people talk about red flag laws, etc. But at the end of the day, it seems that we always see these warning signs about troubled people that still get their hands on guns. What's the more effective way to say, wait a minute, you know, this person should not be in possession of a firearm, let alone be able to purchase one? Once we locate and identify this person as troubled, they shouldn't be having guns in the household or be able to get their hands on them. Where do we go that we actually address that? Everybody talks about it's not the gun, it's the person who pulls the trigger. Well, more often than not, we know who these people are, but yet they still have their hands on guns.
Well, it always seems to be the case after the fact that we can look back and identify, aha, there was something we should have caught. It's much harder when you're looking forward. People say things all the time that they don't mean. But when you put things in writing, when you've done it frequently, when you're off base, that's certainly worthy of investigation. And I think that we're a smart people, or at least we sure used to be in this country, and we can craft solutions to complicated problems. It doesn't have to be all or nothing, because if we start with, well, why don't we just do everything? What we will accomplish is absolutely nothing.
No one's saying everything. No one's talking about banning the ability to purchase a firearm. It's the kind of firearm. I mean, in this country, we still allow people to purchase armor-piercing bullets, which is lunacy to me. You still allow people, why do people need body armor as private citizens? I mean, the amount of law enforcement I've had on this program who say they run into people that are out, that have more firepower than they have and are better equipped than they have in the private sector. For the life of them, they don't understand it, Richard. And now we get to assault weapons. Why do we make these decisions? Why should the AR-15 be able to be purchased in this country? And before we get into the semantics about modifications and everything else, if we stop its purchase and we save one life, why isn't that where we should begin?
Well, you're making an assumption that by stopping the purchase, it's going to save one life. Perhaps that person would have used that gun to protect many lives. So you can't look at this as in a vacuum. Furthermore, when you talk about this assault weapon, this is a semi-automatic firearm, not a true assault weapon. Fair enough. Every semi-automatic rifle ever manufactured is capable of doing the identical thing. Now, a Woodstock gun doesn't look militaristic, but it fires the same round, or frankly, all hunting rifles are larger calibers, moving faster than the AR-15 223 round usually is. But now I'm getting into the details that certainly many gun owners don't know, and almost no non-gun owners would be aware of. These are the details. If we want to be effective, let's do the things that we agree upon and can move forward. Let's hold in abeyance the things we disagree about.
If you want to talk about, Richard, what the public agrees upon, the majority of gun owners and more than 90% of the American public wants universal background checks. That's how the question was posed to them. There wasn't a shading of it. That was the question. Banning assault weapons, more than 70-some-odd% of Americans want that too. My point is, why are we so cautious when the plurality, by a healthy margin, wants something? We had an assault weapons ban in this country. It's not like I'm talking about the art of the impossible. I'm not talking about banning guns. I'm not talking about taking away, Grandpa's hunting rifle, as I saw in your story. I'm talking about things that we've done in the past and overwhelmingly the American public wants. Why don't we give the people what they want?
Well, then we wouldn't have a democracy with rights for the minority anymore, because we would just do what a majority thinks is good. We find somebody we think is guilty, let's just string them up and save a lot of money. That's not
take
what
away the right to bear arms, Richard. That was never mentioned by me or I think any rational person. There's a Second Amendment in this country. I acknowledge it. But you can't own a bazooka. You can't have unlimited rights. We're talking about now reasonable restrictions. And if you believe the public should have a vote in this, and it's not just, one advocacy group, in this case, the NRA, then why are we pussyfooting around stuff that, my God, how many mass shootings do we need with how many similarities one after the other to say enough is enough?
So what are you saying to me? If someone is shot and killed with a 45 caliber gun, that's somehow a little more acceptable than being shot and killed with a 223 round. I don't think that's what you mean.
I'm saying, no, I can tell you exactly what I'm saying, Richard, and you can disagree with me, but I'm saying when you go through the last litany of the mass shootings that we have, there are certain commonalities. An AR-15 is almost always used. Moreover, you have the mentally disturbed person who was on warning lists in the past, and this person has been able to gain access, not always, but often, even when they shouldn't have. So the access to weapons of mass destruction, if you want to call it that, and the ease at which to do it are something that should trouble all of us. And to say, well, background checks for the most part, and, well, you can call any gun anything, so let's not go there. It seems like such a modest step for a situation that deserves and mandates so much more than that, and the public wants more than that.
There are 125 million firearm owners in this country. When you ask a question about universal background checks without getting into the details, you're getting a false reading in the answer. If you ask those very people, do you think you should put your wife or husband through a background check before you hand them your gun? They'd say, of course not. How about your parent? How about your child? Look, in my town here, the former police chief was my best friend. He was here at my house. I sold him a gun. Should I have said to him, gee, I really can't transfer this gun to you. Got to make sure you'd pass a background check. Those are the kinds of individuals I'm talking about, not some guy I met on the street and I go, hey, we're friends, we had a beer, I'm selling. No, that's ridiculous. That shouldn't be allowed. But just because we pass a law that says it shouldn't doesn't mean it's going to be enforced. It doesn't mean that it's going to be followed. At some level, we have to leave it to the people to do the right thing. Let's encourage people to do the right thing with carrots, not always with sticks.
I can, without being a wise ass here, Richard, I can say that hasn't exactly worked out too well. Let's see where we are right now. I would hate to think that anybody thinks the current reality is acceptable. I'll give you this much. You're not saying thoughts and prayers still cover it anymore, but this act has gotten really old. But regardless, check out Richard's piece. You can see it in Politico. Richard Feldman, thanks for the time.
Thank you.
All right, when we come back, we're going to switch gears and we're going to show you how Hurricane Dorian has flattened the Bahamas, and we're also going to tell you where the storm could be headed next.